"You're late. You're out." The Loadmaster did not look up the first time he said it. He looked at the pass, then at her, and made up his mind somewhere in between. He held the boarding pass up so the line behind her could see it, the way a man shows a card he is about to play. "Space A means space available," he said. "Available to people who matter. You're not on my jet." Then he tore it. Once across, clean, and again, and let the 4 pieces fall to the ramp. The heat came off the concrete in sheets. Behind him, a C-17 sat with its ramp down and its 4 engines ticking as they cooled, 200 meters of gray apron shimmering in the early sun. The air smelled of jet fuel and hot rubber, and the faint green of cut grass past the perimeter fence. It was the 16th of June, 2026, and the temperature on the flight line was already climbing past 30 degrees. The woman did not raise her voice. She did not raise anything. She bent at the knees, picked up the 4 torn halves of her boarding pass, squared them against her thumb the way a person squares a deck, and slid them into a jacket pocket. "Understood," she said. She was perhaps 50, hard to tell. Plain travel slacks, a plain jacket gone soft at the cuffs, one weathered canvas bag at her feet. No rank, no name tape, no priority stamp on the pass he had just destroyed. She stepped back off the ramp, not where he pointed, because he hadn't pointed, but to the exact patch of apron that kept her clear of his load path. Her eyes went once to the open ramp, once to the chained pallets inside the hold, and once to the west, where a line of weather was stacking up gray above the tree line. Then they came back and rested on nothing. There was a particular kind of tired in the set of her shoulders, but it was not the tired of a person worn down. It was the tired of a person who had been somewhere hard and was carrying it well. She had come off 3 nights in a chair beside a hospital bed at Landstuhl, beside a young airman from a squadron she had once owned, watching a monitor and learning a family's faces, and she had told no one at the terminal any of that, because none of it was their business, and all of it was hers. She wanted a seat on an airplane, and a long, quiet flight and the particular mercy of being no one for 9 hours. That was the whole of her ambition this morning. She had earned smaller things and been given more. The Loadmaster's name tape read, Tolliver. Technical Sergeant, 3 stripes up and 1 rocker, 33 years old, and certain of every one of them. He turned to the line. "Anybody actually on the manifest, step up," he called. "We don't fly tourists." A couple of the younger passengers laughed, because it is easy to laugh on the right side of a man with a clipboard. Beside Tolliver, a senior airman, Orton by her tape, barely out of her training, 21 and new to the back of the airplane, looked at the torn pass on the ground and then at the woman, and said nothing. Her mouth opened. It closed. The flight mattered. That was the part the line understood, and the woman understood, and Tolliver used. It was the last rotator with open seats for 2 days. The next one was Thursday, and Thursday was a lifetime when a person had somewhere to be. Everyone behind her wanted her gone, so the line would move. Tolliver knew it, and he spent it like a man who had never once run short of anything. Behind the terminal glass, 40 feet away, and 1 pane of tempered window removed from all of it, a Chief Master Sergeant watched the woman pick up her torn pass. His name was Gus Lindholm, 50 years old, 30 of them moving human beings on and off these airplanes, and he had loaded every kind of passenger a uniform could produce. Generals who needed everyone to know it. Privates who needed no one to. Widows flying home behind a flag-draped case in the hold. He knew, the way you know, weather, the difference between a person who was nobody and a person who had decided, today, to be nobody. She was the second kind. It was not the calm. Lots of tired travelers were calm. It was the way she had stepped back to precisely the safe spot without being shown it. The way her eyes had gone to the chains and the sky and the time before they went anywhere else. The way she had squared the torn halves of a worthless piece of paper as though disorder itself offended her. 30 years, and Lindholm had seen presidents bored with less command in their whole body than this woman spent picking trash up off his ramp. He did not know who she was. He found, standing there with a clipboard he was not reading, that he could not look away. The ramp of the C-17 began to rise, the hydraulics whining up through the heat, and Tolliver turned his back on the woman as if she had already stopped existing. The line shuffled forward. Somewhere, a bus brake hissed. The morning went on being a morning. Lindholm set down the clipboard he was not reading and reached, instead, for the real manifest printout. The long one, the one with the priority codes and the full legal names. The one a Loadmaster working fast almost never bothered to read all the way down. Something about the quiet woman with the torn pass would not let him leave it folded. She took a seat against the terminal wall, and she took it the way aircrew take a seat anywhere. Back to the wall, sightline to both doors, and a clean angle on the apron through the glass. She did not slump. She did not pull out a phone to hide inside. She sat with her hands quiet on her knees and read the room the way other people read a clock. And she waited. Out on the apron, the morning's first real problem arrived in the shape of a pallet. It was a late ad, a rolling stock load that had not been planned into the sequence, and it rode up the ramp on a K-loader while Tolliver waved it into the hold. Then it stopped riding smoothly anywhere because the numbers had stopped working. Orton stood at the load plan with a grease pencil and a face going pale around the edges. Tolliver leaned over the same sheet and ran the same arithmetic twice and got the same wrong answer. 91,000 pounds, Orton said, low. Sergeant, that puts us aft. Station 420, it's outside the envelope. It's fine. It's not fine, I said it's fine. But he ran it a third time, and it wasn't fine, and now the whole load was frozen on the line. 15 minutes bled off the schedule. The center of balance for a C-17 is not a suggestion. It is the difference between an airplane that flies and an airplane that does interesting things on rotation. And Tolliver knew that better than anyone on the apron, which was exactly why he could not make himself say so out loud. Lindholm came through the terminal at a fast walk, headset cord swinging, muttering the problem to the air the way a harried man does, not to anyone, least of all to a passenger. Aft of limits, late pallet, and a Loadmaster who'd rather hold the jet than admit it, he said, mostly to himself, passing the woman against the wall. Without looking up from her quiet hands, she said, "Move it to station 380. Rerun." Lindholm stopped. "Say again?" "You're aft of limits." She lifted her eyes to him, and they were very level. "Forward 2 stations fixes it. Move the pallet to 380, rechain, rerun your weight and balance. You'll be green." 6 words, and then a few more, in the flat, clipped grammar of a person who had given that instruction 100 times to people who jumped when she gave it. Not a guess. Not a civilian who had read a manual on the internet. The vocabulary sat in her mouth like a tool worn smooth by use. Stations, aft of limits, rechain. And the cadence of it was all economy. Nothing wasted. The way pilots talk on a radio when the fuel is low and the words have to count. Lindholm looked at her for 1 full second. Then he carried the fix out to the apron as though it had been his own, because that was faster than explaining where it had come from. It worked. They broke the pallet's chains, rolled it forward 2 stations to 380, set it, reran the math, and the load sheet went green on the first try. The hold sealed up. The schedule stopped bleeding. Out on the line, Tolliver took the corrected sheet and signed it, and never once wondered where the answer had come from, because men like Tolliver assume good answers fall out of the sky onto men like Tolliver. There is a thing that happens to a load when the center of balance is wrong, and Lindholm had seen it once, early, on a ramp in another decade. A heavy jet that rotated and kept rotating, nose climbing past where the nose should stop. The whole airframe trembling on the edge of a stall it should never have been near. All because a number on a sheet had been off by 2 stations. The crew had saved it by a margin you could measure in heartbeats. He had carried the picture of it for 20 years. He knew exactly what the quiet woman had just prevented with 6 words and a glance she had taken across 200 meters of concrete at an airplane she was not allowed to board. Lindholm came back inside and stood in the doorway with the green load sheet in his hand and looked at the woman against the wall for a long, long moment. He did not know her name yet. He knew now what she was. She had read an airplane she could not see from across an apron in a language only a few thousand people on Earth spoke fluently, and she had done it while bumped, mocked, and seated against a wall like luggage. She had not done it to prove anything. That was the part that closed his throat a little. She had done it because a wrong load offended her, the way a wrong note offends a musician, reflexive, impersonal. And she had handed the fix to a passing stranger and gone back to watching the weather as if she had picked up a dropped glove. The watcher's certainty arrived all at once and settled in his chest like a swallowed stone. He stepped to the desk, picked up the phone, and asked the duty clerk to pull the full legal manifest. Every name, every priority code, all the way to the bottom of the page. It did not take long for word to travel that the bumped woman had handed the chief the fix that unstuck the jet. It traveled to the apron, and it reached Tolliver. And instead of landing as gratitude, it landed somewhere under his pride and stung. He came back through the terminal on a break and found her against the wall and stopped in front of her, hands on his hips, grinning the grin of a man performing for an audience he assumes is on his side. "Heard you saved the day," he said. "Let me guess. You flew a desk once. Maybe you read a big, thick manual on a long flight." He leaned down a little. "Sweetheart, this is a real airplane. Reading about it isn't the same as humping it." She watched the western sky over his shoulder and said nothing. "The tourist," he announced to the back of the apron, to Orton, to the fleet service crew rolling past with a baggage train. "We got ourselves a ramp lawyer. Knows the regs better than the people who fly the jet." The name caught the way a cheap thing catches. The tourist. It went to the bus driver and came back. It went to a pair of young troops by the door who repeated it to each other and laughed. Orton laughed once. A reflex, a single ugly bark of it, and then looked as though she wanted to take it back out of the air with her hands. She turned away and busied herself with nothing. Through all of it, the woman was still. She watched the weather stack up gray to the west. She watched the chains on the K-loader. She tipped her wrist once and read the time off the inside of it. The watch face turned inward against her pulse, and the narrator of her own life would have told you this was not weakness and not even patience exactly. It was a decision, made fresh each second, not to spend a single round on a target that was not worth the powder. A person learns that economy somewhere. A person doesn't learn it at a desk. It was Orton who broke. She came over with a cold bottle of water sweating in her hand and a folding chair under her arm, and set them down near the woman without quite meeting her eyes. The way you leave food for something you are ashamed of having kicked. "There's a seat by the desk," Orton said. "Cooler, if you want it." The woman looked up at her, and for the first time all morning, something in her face opened a half-inch. "You're all right," she said. 2 words. The airman would carry them a long way. If it is making you angry to watch a good woman called a tourist by a man who has not the first idea what she has carried. Sit with that anger a moment, and then do something with it. Subscribe to Honor Tales. Stay to the end, because the people who underestimate the quiet woman against the wall are about to learn, all at once, and in front of everyone, exactly who she is. Tolliver, riding the laugh, decided the woman was no longer a person to be mocked. She was a problem to be solved on paper. He reached for the manifest tablet. There is a cruelty that lives in systems, quieter than a raised hand, and far more durable. Tolliver knew it the way every man who has run a small kingdom knows it. He opened the load log on the tablet, found the line where her name still sat with its priority code, and entered her as a no-show. Passenger failed to appear, removed for cause. At 0941, and reassigned her seat to a late ad who had slipped him a friendly word at the bottom of the ramp. It took 9 seconds. It would outlive the morning, the insult, all of it. An insult is weather. A false entry in a federal manifest is geology. A few minutes later, Orton, sent by Tolliver and hating the errand, approached the woman to re-verify identification for the manifest. The woman did not reach for a wallet. She did not produce a card, a folder, a green ID, anything. Her watch stayed turned to the inside of her wrist. She gave her name in the flat voice of someone who had handed it across 1,000 counters and never once needed it to mean more than the 4 letters it spelled. Crane, she said. That's all you need. What the characters all missed, the narrator did not. People who carry real authority almost never reach for it. They have spent their lives surrounded by people whose job is to know who they are. The reflex to prove it gets worn away early. The man who flashes a badge in a parking lot is rarely the most dangerous man in the parking lot. The woman who simply gives her last name and waits. She is the one to watch. Behind the desk, Lindholm watched the no-show entry hit the system in real time. He saw the timestamp. He saw Tolliver's login stamped on it. He saw, 12 feet away, the woman who had supposedly failed to appear, sitting in a folding chair by his desk with a bottle of water she had not opened. He knew it was false the instant it landed. He also knew exactly what it would cost to walk onto a Loadmaster's ramp and call him a liar in front of his crew without the proof folded in his own hand first. So he did not shout. He pulled thread. He brought up the full legal manifest, scrolled past the short names and the abbreviations, and the priority codes Tolliver had skimmed past in his hurry to be important, and he went all the way down. And then he found the line. He read it once. He read it again, his lips moving slightly. The way a man reads a number he is sure he has misunderstood. The priority code. The legal name. The remarks field, with its short, bloodless, enormous notation. The bearing. The load fix from across the apron. The stillness against the wall. The 4 letters she had handed Orton like loose change. They all swung around at once and locked onto the line on the screen. And the line on the screen made Gus Lindholm reach back without looking and find the edge of the desk and sit down in his chair. He had been doing this work since before Tolliver could walk. He had built a whole career on being the man who was never surprised, the steady hand at the desk while everyone else ran. And in 30 years he had learned that the worst mistakes were never loud. They did not announce themselves. They came in quietly on an ordinary morning, when a confident man in a hurry skimmed past one line on a long page because he had already decided the answer. He looked from the screen to the woman in the folding chair, opening a bottle of water she had not asked anyone for, and he thought, with something close to grief, "Son, you have no idea what you've started, and I cannot stop it now, even if I wanted to." "That can't be right," he said to no one. The audience did not see the screen, not yet. But the chief sat very still with a printout in his hand that he could not make himself believe, across a terminal from a Loadmaster who had just falsified a federal manifest, on a flight that closed in 20 minutes. And he understood that he was, for the moment, the only person on the entire apron who could feel the storm coming. He gave Tolliver the exit. He owed him that much, one senior NCO to a junior one, before the world arrived. Lindholm walked out onto the apron and drew Tolliver aside, away from the line, into the engine noise, where words go to die before they reach an audience. He kept his voice level and low and entirely without threat, which is the most frightening register a chief master sergeant owns. "Sergeant, listen to me. Fix the manifest. Reverse the no-show. Put her back on the airplane, in a seat, and walk over there and apologize to her like a man." He paused. "Do it before that ramp closes, and we will never speak of this again." "You have my word." Tolliver almost laughed. He had read the chief's calm as softness, the way a certain kind of man always reads restraint, and he dug in with the full weight of a person who has decided the rules are a costume he gets to wear. "She's a no-show, Chief. It's in the system. It's done." He spread his hands, reasonable, aggrieved. "You want me to falsify a manifest? Lie in the log to put some tourist on my jet, because she did you a card trick with the weight and balance. That's not how my ramp runs." My ramp. The chief heard it. He had given the man a door, held it open, and watched him decide that walking through it was beneath him. There is a moment with some people where you understand that they are going to insist on the consequence, that they have mistaken the warning for the danger and cannot be made to see the difference. Lindholm reached it. He had tried. He would be able to tell himself that later, and it would even be true. He had pulled the man aside instead of calling the wing. He had offered him the version of the morning where the whole thing evaporated, and no one ever knew. The version where a young sergeant gets to keep his wings and his pride and learns the lesson cheap. Most people, given that door, take it. Lindholm had spent 30 years watching the smart ones take it. It was the difference between the careers that lasted and the careers that ended on aprons like this one. And he had assumed, foolishly, that a man who had made technical sergeant would know which side of that line he wanted to be on. He had assumed Tolliver was redeemable in the small, ordinary way that almost everyone is redeemable, given the chance to quietly fix a thing before it hardens. He had been wrong, and being wrong about a person is its own particular weight, and the chief picked it up without complaint and set it down where he kept the others. He stopped protecting Tolliver. He did it quietly, the way he did everything, with a small nod and a step back, and the Loadmaster mistook that, too, for a victory. The chief made one phone call, not to security forces, not to the wing. He called the operations desk and confirmed a single line of information, an arrival time. A staff car, inbound, with a passenger who was already on the manifest he had been reading. Then he put the phone in his pocket and let it be. Through all of it, the woman sat in the folding chair by the desk, unmoved, the Western Weather Building in the glass behind her, the apron loud with the whine of ground equipment. Tip of the wrist. Read the time. Eyes to the chains, the ramp, the sky. She was not waiting to be rescued. The narrator would have made that plain to anyone watching. She had spent a career being the rescue, and she had not the faintest expectation of becoming the rescued now. She was waiting for a flight. That was all. The rest was incidental, and the rest was 12 minutes out, riding a staff car onto the apron road. There is a name on the chief's printout that explains everything you have watched this morning. There is a man about to step onto this flight line who would give away anything he owns. His seat, his airplane, the eagles on his shoulders. For the woman a Loadmaster has spent an hour calling a tourist. If you want to see the exact moment it all turns, the moment the apron goes silent and the truth stands up on its own legs, subscribe to Honor Tales now and stay with us. You are very close. A staff car turned onto the apron road, early, sun flaring off its windshield. The chief stood up out of his chair. because the man unfolding from the back of that car was the one person at Ramstein who could end this in a sentence. And, Lindholm realized with a cold drop in his stomach, the one person who must never, ever learn what had been done to her here. Pull back now, away from the apron and the heat, and the man with the torn pass on his conscience, all the way back to a night 18 years gone, because you cannot understand the quiet woman in the folding chair until you understand what made her quiet. Her name was Evelyn Crane, Major General, United States Air Force, a senior commander in the command that owns the airlift, the gray jets, the global reach, the long, unglamorous business of carrying everything the nation needs to wherever it bleeds. Call sign Vesper. On her dress uniform, when she wore it, which was as rarely as the job allowed, there rode a distinguished flying cross with a small bronze V for valor, and beside it, the purple ribbon a person only earns by being in the wrong place when the medal comes through. She had been flying these airplanes, or commanding the people who flew them, for the better part of 3 decades. 18 years before the torn boarding pass, she had been 30 years old and a captain, and the aircraft commander of a C-17 on a night resupply into a forward field that was about to stop being safe. The run was routine until it was not. Pallets out, the field taking the first mortar at 9 minutes to wheels up, the routine resupply turning in the space of one radio call into an evacuation. They loaded wounded where the pallets had been, 41 of them, stretchers double-stacked and lashed, men who an hour earlier had been holding a perimeter and were now cargo. The worst kind, the kind that breathes. 800 meters of cratered runway in front of her, lit by nothing she could trust. Shrapnel from a near impact walked across the apron and chewed the number 3 engine to scrap before she ever released the brakes. She remembered the arithmetic of it more clearly than she remembered her own wedding. The field controller's voice going thin and fast, the fuel she did not have to wait for a tow. The math of a 4-engine jet down to 3 before it had even started to move, and the way every checklist she had ever memorized had distilled, in that minute, into a single equation with 2 answers. Stay and be overrun, or take the runway she had and trust an airplane that was already bleeding. Some choices are not brave. They only look brave from the outside. From the inside, they are just the one door left unlocked, and you go through it because the alternative is to stand still and die, and standing still had never once been in her. She flew it out anyway. 3 engines, one of them dying by degrees, a hold full of the wounded, and a co-pilot she could not help. Captain Reed Sumner had been in the right seat. They had come up together. He had a wife and a baby girl, and a habit of humming through the checklist that drove her, fondly, to distraction. On the takeoff roll, a round came through the side glass, and Reed was gone before the gear was up. Gone in the particular completeness that leaves the living no task, no tourniquet, nothing to do but the airplane. She had 800 meters and 3 engines, and 41 men in the back, and a friend beside her who would never hum through another checklist, and she did the only thing the moment allowed. Fly the airplane, she told herself, in the flat interior voice she would carry for 18 years. You can grieve on the ground. She rotated at the last usable foot of runway. She nursed the dying engine up and over the ridge and out into the dark. And she held the airplane in the air by what felt like force of will, and was actually the accumulated weight of 10,000 hours of refusing to panic. And in the back, in the red dark, keeping 41 men alive with his voice, was the Loadmaster. A young staff sergeant, 29, named Travis Boyd, calling the bleeds, calling the breathing, moving stretcher to stretcher with his headset cord stretched to its limit, narrating the cargo hold to her on the interphone because she could not turn around, and he would not let her fly blind. He talked the whole way. He kept them together, with nothing but nerve and a calm he did not feel. What she kept from that night was not the cross they pinned on her later. and not the call sign that came with it. The decorations were for other people, she had decided long ago. For the institution that needed its stories, for the young troops who needed to believe such things were survivable. They had given her the Distinguished Flying Cross in a hangar with a band, and she had stood at attention while a general read a citation that turned the worst night of her life into 4 tidy sentences, and she had thought the entire time about Reed Sumner's wife in the 3rd row holding a baby who would never remember her father humming through a checklist. That was what a medal was, a thing you wore so that other people did not have to carry the weight of what it stood for. What she kept was Boyd's voice on the interphone somewhere over the border, cracking and steadying in the same breath, saying the only words that mattered. "They're all still with us, ma'am. Everyone. They're all still with us." She had flown 4 more years on the line after that, and 3 decades in the service all told, and she had commanded thousands of people and signed orders that moved whole wings across whole oceans, and not one thing in any of it had ever felt as much like the actual job as that boy's voice in the red dark, refusing to let go of 41 men she could not see. 18 years later, on a hot apron at Ramstein, the door of a staff car opened, and the young Loadmaster she had flown out of the dark, the one who was alive to grow older only because she had refused to leave him in that field, stepped out wearing the silver eagles of a wing commander, and he was 40 feet from seeing her face. It did not get that far before Tolliver crossed the line. Recognition was coming, but cruelty was already there, and cruelty does not wait politely for the rescue to arrive. Boarding was closing. The ramp clock was running down, and Tolliver had decided the tourist lingering near his airplane had stopped being a joke and started being a liability, a security problem, in the language that lets a man dress up his pride as a procedure. He raised his voice so the apron would hear him do his duty. "Ma'am, you are interfering with flight operations," he called, walking toward her, chin up, playing to the line. "This is a secure flight line. Step off my ramp now, or I will have you removed." She rose from the folding chair, unhurried, and said, calmly, with no edge at all, that she held a valid pass. Then she took the 4 squared halves of the boarding pass he had torn from her pocket and held them up, fitted together, the way a person returns a thing to its owner. It was the worst thing she could have done to him, because it was the truth, and it was witnessed. Tolliver's face went tight. He stepped in, took the canvas bag off the ramp at her feet, and set it down hard over the painted edge line. Then he put his hand on her arm to turn her. The narrator must be exact here, because everything turns on it. She let it happen. In the half-second his hand closed on her arm, she read his balance, the width of his stance, the angle of his wrist, the dozen small openings a body offers when it grabs another body in anger. Read them the way she read a load plan, automatically, completely. And she did precisely nothing with any of it. She could have put him on the concrete before his next breath. There were, on that apron, perhaps 4 people alive more capable of ending a confrontation with their hands, and none of them were within 5,000 miles. She chose the hardest thing a capable person can choose. She kept her hands at her sides and let a smaller man move her arm. Orton saw the hand on the woman's arm and went white. Lindholm, halfway across the terminal, saw it and broke into a run, the green load sheet falling from his hand. A dozen passengers in the line saw a loadmaster lay hands on a quiet, gray-jacketed woman who had done nothing but stand where she was allowed to stand. The thing was real now. Logged, witnessed, crossed. The bright line stepped over in full view of the exact people who, in 90 seconds, were going to matter more than anyone on that apron had ever mattered to Bryce Tolliver in his life. He could not have known it, but he had just done the one thing that turned a bad morning into a career-ending one. Mockery is survivable. A nickname is survivable. Even the false manifest entry, caught early, might have cost him only a hard conversation and a letter in a file. But a hand laid in anger on a passenger who had given him no cause. That was assault, witnessed, and witnessed assault does not bend or blur or get talked away in the comfortable dark of a duty office. It stands in the daylight where everyone can see it, and he had chosen to do it at the precise moment when the witnesses were about to include a wing commander and the woman was about to stop being anonymous. There is a kind of person who, handed a shovel and standing in a hole, digs. Tolliver dug, and he dug fast, and he never once looked up to see how deep he had gone. And the woman looked at him, with his hand still on her arm, and she smiled. It was small. It was almost kind. It was not a threat and not a warning, and that was what made it terrible. It was the first time she had smiled all morning. "Okay," she said. It was the first time she had smiled all morning, and it was the worst thing that had happened to Bryce Tolliver all day, and he did not yet know why. Security forces started across the apron toward the woman with the torn pass, 2 of them at a fast walk, called by a loadmaster to remove a major general from a flight line. And across the concrete, halfway out of his staff car, with one hand still on the door, the wing commander saw the hand on her arm. He saw her face, and every drop of color went out of his own. Recognition crossed the apron on foot. Colonel Travis Boyd did not hurry, exactly, and he did not slow. He walked across the open concrete in a straight line, past the 2 security forces troops, who read something in his face, and stopped where they stood. Past the chief, who had come to a halt with one hand pressed to his mouth. Past the whole shuffling line. And he did not stop until he stood in front of the gray-jacketed woman Tolliver had by the arm. The apron went quiet in rows, the way a crowd does when it senses a thing it doesn't yet understand. The laughter died first, then the talk, then even the shuffling, until there was only the whine of a ground cart somewhere and the wind coming off the building weather. Tolliver's hand was still on her arm. Boyd looked at the hand. Then he looked at the woman's face, and 18 years fell away from him all at once, and the colonel, the wing commander, the man who owned this flight line and every airplane on it, came to attention and rendered her a salute, his spine snapping straight, his hand coming up sharp enough to hear. He said it loud enough to carry to the back of the line. "General Crane. Vesper." His voice did not shake, but it cost him not to. "Ma'am, it is an honor to have you on my flight line." The word moved through the crowd like a dropped tray in a silent hall. "General." It hit the line and rebounded. It hit Tolliver square in the chest. His face did the whole journey in about 4 seconds, and the apron watched it go. First confusion, the blank look of a man whose model of the world has just returned in error. Then disbelief, a small shake of the head. "No, that's not." Then recognition, the awful dawning, his eyes going to the manifest tablet still in his hand, and the priority line he had skipped past in his hurry to be important, the legal name he had never read, the code he had never bothered to decode. And then horror, plain and total, as his hand came off her arm by itself, as if her sleeve had turned to flame. The aircraft was full. That was the cruel, ordinary arithmetic of it. The seats were spoken for, everyone, by troops rotating home, and families, and a stretcher case in the back. And the ramp was closing, and there was exactly 1 seat on that airplane that could be freed without bumping a single soul who had earned it. Boyd's. He did not hesitate for the length of a breath. "Put the general in my seat," he said, turning his head a few degrees toward Lindholm without breaking his attention. "Strike my name off the manifest. I'll catch the Thursday rotator. Chief, make it happen now." Lindholm was already moving, already correcting the log with the relish of a man who has been holding his breath for an hour. As he passed close to Crane, he said it low, just for her, the only words he would spend. "I knew it was you, ma'am," the chief murmured. "I read it twice. I just couldn't make myself believe a man would be that foolish." Boyd was still at attention. He had not come out of it. And because the line was watching, because Tolliver was watching, because some part of him needed to say it out loud after 18 years of saying it only to himself, the colonel told the apron exactly why a wing commander gives a major general his seat as though it were nothing at all. 18 years ago, he said, this officer flew a shot-up airplane off a field that was supposed to be my grave. 3 engines, a hold full of us. She brought every man home. His jaw worked once. She can have my seat. She can have anything I've got. Anything this wing has got. For the first time, Crane moved. She reached up and, with 2 fingers, brought Boyd's salute down, gently, the small private gesture of a senior officer releasing a junior from a courtesy that has gone on long enough. And she looked at him, at the eagles on his shoulders, at the lines that 18 years had put on a face she remembered young and terrified in a red-lit cargo hold. "Stand easy, Travis," she said quietly. Only the nearest few heard it. "You got old." "So did you, ma'am," he said, and his voice finally cracked, and he laughed once, wet and unashamed, the laugh of a man who has been carrying a debt for 18 years and just discovered the person he owed it to was standing on his flight line being called a tourist. The line did not laugh with him. The line had gone somewhere quieter than laughter. A master sergeant near the front, a man who had heard 1,000 stories and believed a careful number of them, had taken his cap off without seeming to know he had done it. A young soldier was filming and had forgotten to. The apron held its breath in the way crowds do when they have watched the floor of the world tilt and reveal that the small woman they had been ignoring was the fixed point all along. And Bryce Tolliver stood frozen at the bottom of his own ramp, the 4 torn halves of a boarding pass on the concrete between his boots, as the entire apron understood at the same instant exactly what he had done, and exactly to whom he had done it. The consequences came fast, and they came in the shape of process, which is worse than fury. Within the hour, the manifest audit told its flat story. The no-show entry, time-stamped 0941, with Tolliver's login stamped on it like a fingerprint. The seat reassigned to a late ad who had said the right friendly words at the bottom of the ramp. The torn boarding pass, recovered from the concrete and bagged, 4 neat halves. And then the part Tolliver had not counted on. 2 other passengers, quietly to the chief, saying it had happened to them as well, on other mornings. His ramp, the same casual arithmetic of who mattered and who did not. He was pulled from flying status before the airplane he had loaded was off the ground. Not dragged away, not shouted at, simply removed, his crew wings set aside, held pending an Inspector General inquiry into the manifest, the entry, and the pattern. He said nothing now. There was, at last, nothing to say. A man who has spent a morning telling everyone how things run on his ramp has no words left when the institution quietly informs him that the ramp was never his. What undid him was not the general. The general never said a word against him, never asked for it. In the days that followed, never once mentioned his name. What undid him was the page he had skipped, the one line of a long manifest he had been too sure of himself to read, and the simple, terrible fact that the system he had used to erase a quiet woman kept a perfect record of the hand that held the pen. He had thought authority was the loud part, the clipboard, the voice, the right to tear a stranger's pass in half and let the pieces fall. He was learning, in the worst possible classroom, that authority is mostly the quiet part, knowing what you are looking at, and choosing, when no one is making you, to treat it with care. He had failed the only test that ever actually counted, and he had failed it in front of everyone on an ordinary Tuesday over a seat on an airplane. It was Senior Airman Lacey Orton who closed the door. She went to Lindholm with the real load log in her hands and told him the truth, on the record, in her own voice. That the no-show was false, that she had watched it entered, that she had laughed once when she should have spoken and had been ashamed of it ever since. It costs something to inform on your own Loadmaster on your own flight line at 21 years old. She paid it without being asked. Crane, before she boarded, walked over to the young airman. This time, she gave her more than 2 words. "You told the truth when it was expensive, Airman Orton," she said. "Most people only manage it when it's free. That right there, that's the whole job. Everything else is just airplanes." She held the young woman's eyes. "You're going to make fine aircrew. Carry it." If you stayed for that, for the moment the apron went quiet and the truth stood up on its own, and the right people finally saw the woman clearly, then you already understand what this channel is for. Subscribe to Honor Tales, and send this to someone who has been called a tourist by a man who never once thought to ask what they had carried. There are more of these. Every one of them is true to something. The ramp closed. They put the general in the wing commander's seat, red webbing, a cargo strap across her lap, the 4 great engines spooling up through the soles of her boots, in a vibration she had felt 10,000 times and never tired of. She buckled in beside a sergeant rotating home and a young mother with a sleeping child, and she was, for the length of a flight, exactly what she had asked to be all morning. A passenger. Through the small porthole she could see Boyd at the bottom of the ramp. He was not saluting now. The honors were done. He simply stood there as the ramp sealed. And at the last, he laid his hand flat against the cold aluminum of the fuselage, palm open, for 1 beat, the way a person touches the flank of a thing that once carried him home out of the dark. No words. From inside, none needed. She put her own hand briefly against the skin of the airplane on her side, and that was the whole conversation, 18 years long, finished in a touch through 3/4 of an inch of metal. The C-17 taxied, lined up, and rolled. The nose came up off Ramstein into a sky that had gone against the morning's threat, a clean and enormous blue. As the gear thumped up into the wells, her phone buzzed once in her pocket, the last message before she would kill the power for the flight. 3 lines, from a name she knew the way you know an old scar. Skylark to Vesper. The strip in the Horn of Africa is lit again. Dunbar's flying lead. He's asking for you. She read it once. She did not smile, and she did not frown. She turned the phone over in her hand, the watch face turned inward against her pulse, and looked out the porthole at the receding gray apron and the small figure of a wing commander who had not yet gone inside. Somewhere down there, a torn boarding pass had been bagged as evidence, and somewhere over the dark water ahead, a lit airstrip was waiting with her name already in someone's mouth. She closed her eyes. There would be time enough to decide on the ground. There always was. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.